Welcome to episode 207 of the Lone Hockey Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between Chicago and Carolina. And I was really impressed with how the Hawks played, and obviously another loss. And it's just interesting to see how they continue to go about things. Like lately, for some reason, in the first period and somewhat in the second period, it's been their shot totals that have somehow not been able to be generated. And they haven't been shooting the puck a lot. They haven't had sustained offense throughout the first half of the game or so. It's been quite troublesome there. And they played, ironically, so much better in the back half of the second and in the third period, which is kind of weird to say, but it's true. And that's how they've played over the course of, I would say, the last week and a half. Just looking at their offense, like a lot of guys, like I said before, who have been more productive as of late, and guys who have really been more engaged offensively. And I feel like that's a really good sign to see. And on the flip side of that, like there's certain things defensively that some of these guys can't necessarily do and aren't necessarily fully consistent at. And I feel like there's just situations in zone where sometimes they lose a man, or sometimes two guys collapse on one, or sometimes they just don't mark a guy coming out of the corners. They don't pivot the right way. The D don't pivot the right way coming out of the corners, or something like that. And I feel like I've seen that a lot more in D zone lately. And it's been a little troublesome, especially since they've allowed teams to pretty much outshoot them almost by double in the course of the last week and a half ish. And that being in the first period. But Chicago, they were able to bounce back. They were down, I believe it was 3-1 early. They managed to find their way back into the game. I really thought, feels like I've said this so many times. But I really did think through those last 5 minutes of the game in the third period that the Hawks were going to tie it and send it to overtime, just because of the momentum they had. Like, obviously, you run into a good goalie like Pyotr Kochetkov, who's been consistent and who's really aggressive in net. You're going to run into some issues and some frustration there. But I thought they were really trying to create on him really well. And obviously, he's an aggressive goalie. He's not afraid to get out of the paint, which is slightly unorthodox because it makes him a little unpredictable. But there are a lot of guys driving the net. There are a lot of guys, especially driving the net off line rush. There are a lot of guys in zone offensively crouching the net, trying to create secondary opportunities and such. And they just had a lot of guys rolling in that sense. And I felt like a lot of their guys were engaged more on line rush than anywhere else. And Connor Bedard, he had a really nice goal early on in the game off a really nice transition pass and an outlet pass from Seth Jones to be able to get up ice quickly. And he fed Bedard. Bedard was all alone and quickly stick handled and scored 5 hole. It was just awesome goal, bouncing off that game that he had in Tampa. And he's so electric to watch when he's playing consistent and when he's scoring a lot too. Like when he's scoring a lot, he's really feeling it. And he just really, it becomes a major driver in his play. I feel like the goal scoring has more of an impact on him than his actual playmaking because the goal scoring just fuels him to do more. And it's so fun to watch when he's able to do it and how he's able to execute. And just so many other guys are noticeable. Ilya Mikheyev was really noticeable. Obviously, Seth Jones has been very consistent lately, which is really good to see offensively. And Nick Foligno is really good. Jason Dickinson was really good. On Carolina's side, we have Mikko Rantanen, who scored his first goal as a Cane and scored at home for the first time. And man, is he a force to be reckoned with. It's so interesting because I remember when the trade happened, talking about the trade, and I was like, how is Rantanen really gonna make progress like without McKinnon and not playing with McKinnon? Not saying that he's a product of McKinnon because he's been one of the most consistent power forwards, I would say, the last decade or around there. Definitely the last 7 years, 8 years or so. But I was just curious to see how he would adapt to a new environment with a new team after spending basically 10 years with one team. And he's fit in really well. I feel like it's so interesting because when you think of Carolina now, you think Rantanen even more because he has that star, elite superstar like quality that allows him to be arguably the best player on this team. And I know Sebastian Aho is right next to him there, but there's a legitimate argument to be made that he could be the best player on this team. And he's not in the shadows of Nathan McKinnon. He's not in the shadows of Cale Makar. I know Cale Makar is a defenseman, but still, Point being is that he's not in the shadows of those guys, and he's just able to create his own opportunity, which I feel like he kind of likes because he's able to get that consistent ice time still and just play elite level minutes all the time. But he's relied upon as kind of that top dog and just being able to be that reliable source of offense and just constantly facilitating plays. I feel like that's going to be a huge impact on him in Carolina. He was really exciting to watch yesterday too. Like I noticed him how he's handling contact. He's so interesting too because he plays much bigger than he's 6'4". It sounds weird to say, but I swear he plays like he's 6'7". Just because of how filled out the mass he has in his frame, I feel like that makes him a little bit bigger and look a little bit bigger. So it kind of creates a bit of an optical illusion for your eyes. But with him, he just plays like I swear he's like he's 6'6" or 6'7". Like he just plays taller than he is, and he's 6'4", which is already really tall for a forward in the league today, and especially a skill forward who can blend both. But he was really exciting to watch. I thought Juha Yasko was really exciting to watch, and Jackson Blake was one of the guys I've been really impressed with, and him being a guy that was drafted a few years ago in the later rounds of the draft to where he is now. I remember looking back in the 2021 NHL draft class, I was thinking in my head, I know it sounds obvious to say this now, but I was like, how is nobody drafting Jackson Blake? I honestly thought Jackson Blake could have been a second rounder, maybe even a first, legitimately, because at the time he was playing with Chicago in the USHL, and I would watch him a ton, just follow his games a ton because I was scouting for them. And Blake was a guy who, even though he's playing with Adam Fantilli there, on the same line, and they were just getting reps on the power play together. I thought individually Jackson Blake showed a lot of high-end flashes of being his own play driver on his line, especially when there were times where Fantilli was out. I remember there was a suspension where Fantilli got in a fight and then he got suspended. That was after a game against Green Bay. He got suspended, and then Jackson Blake just kind of took over for that brief stint there. But that's just an example. Like I saw flashes of him in the USHL of translatable skill, of him being able to manipulate guys with his hip pocket, with puck positioning, with him being able to understand how to turn guys' feet in terms of the defenseman, how to drive play and line rush, how to get off the wall. Like when I was watching him, it wasn't just watching him like, okay, this guy's good. It was actually trying to study what he could be based on translatable factors. Defensively, he was not the most engaged at that time, I would say. And he had two-way potential. It was just more a matter of him trying to use that more. But I would say he's more of a two-zone player, that being a neutral zone player and an O-zone player versus him being a D-zone player. So he wasn't all three zones guy. He was a two-zone player to me at that time. And he's just really evolved. Like I watched him yesterday and I was so impressed with his ability to handle pucks at speed. He's added a gear to his foot speed ever since leaving Chicago, going to North Dakota. And obviously, Nodak just has a really strong reputation for developing guys in the NHL. And Blake, he showed a lot of finesse in terms of being able to stick handle through guys' sticks, being able to stick handle through feet, being able to turn guys' feet, being able to quickly use puck positioning, get shots on net, or hide deception in his playmaking, especially on the power play, working on the flanks. I saw a lot of that. I was really impressed with it. I thought he was just doing a really good job. He's one of my, it's so weird to say, but one of my favorite players to watch, probably because I'm a little biased because I've watched him a lot previously in junior, but one of my favorite players to watch on this team just because of how hard he works. He's really evolved into an all three zone player now because he's reliable defensively. He checks. He's got really good stick detail and his angling, his ability to cut ice in half, how he surfs guys down. Like that translates to a lot of his forechecking ability too. In Carolina, they're one of the more disciplined teams in the league when it comes to forechecking and just man on man coverage, check changes, and being able to cover in D zone. And just as a testament to the standards that they play with. And with Jackson Blake, he's fit seamlessly into that style of play because not only is he skilled, but he's also reliable defensively. He can check and he can check with hockey sense. So he's got those elements. He's been a really nice addition because they had him in that last game in Rantanen's first game. They had him on a line. They had Jackson Blake, I'm talking about, on a line with Rantanen and Aho. And that line just buzzed together. They were so good together. That trio really worked and really gelled. And Jackson Blake, he's just I think he's going to evolve an even better player over time. And his dad obviously had a great NHL career. I wouldn't be surprised to see him do the same individually. And obviously, different story compared to his dad, but he's going to be an interesting player to watch for this team. He's one of the leading rookie goal scorers right now. Just has been really exciting down the stretch of the season. Really fun to watch. And then Jack Roslovic, I want to talk about too. I could talk about Jacob Slavin, but Jacob Slavin, I could talk. He's so interesting, just based on defensive angles, how he shuts plays down. But I feel like it's just gotten to the point where he's not really underrated more anymore because everybody's talking about him. It's kind of like when Alexander Barkov was quote unquote underrated, and then everybody started talking about him, and he's not really underrated anymore because he's getting talked about around the league. But Slavin's kind of that same realm, and he's super underrated, but he's not really as underrated anymore just because he's talked about throughout the league so often now. He was really good. Jack Roslovic, I thought was noticeable in transition. He was noticeable off the rush. He was noticeable with his creativity and his puck skill, and a hidden gem for them picking him up late in the offseason last year. He's turned into a 20 goal scorer. I'm really curious to see if he's able to maintain that consistency over time in his offense and how that plays out down the stretch. Maybe you never know. He could be a really good playoff performer for them too, eventually, assuming Carolina makes the playoffs with how they're playing right now. And he was just really creative, really nifty, tons of speed, tons of skill. I wouldn't say dynamic, but he was borderline dynamic in terms of how he uses his feet and how he slips around pressure with ease. So he was really good and really noticeable.